Hi, my name is Stephanie Dunn and I'm the founder of Nutrition QED, and today I want to talk to you about lab values and why it is so important that you learn how to really look at your lab values and keep pushing if your doctor says that your lab values are normal but you still have symptoms. So first of all, let me start by telling you how reference ranges for labs are determined. So it's based on a statistical curve. If you don't know statistics, again, you don't need to know everything about it, but I want to give you at least a baseline. So what is considered normal? So you may have noticed that if you move from one lab to another, or your doctor uses different labs, that the results may actually show that different ranges are considered normal for that lab. It's because it's based on a curve. And there's an average in the middle of the curve, and within 2 standard deviations above and 2 standard deviations below that average, 95% of the population falls within that range. It also happens with abnormal curves. So this might be, for example, the number of antibodies that somebody shows against their thyroid. So for the most part, people are not going to have any antibodies, or maybe just a few, but there's going to be some people who have a lot. But again, within that range, they're going to look for the average and 2 standard deviations below and 2 standard deviations above that average to find 95% of the population. Now, it's not 95% of the whole population, it's 95% of what's considered healthy for that lab value. And that population is determined on where that lab is located. So the people who are living in that area, for example, that region of the country, or maybe even that particular state, determine what's considered within range for that lab. And again, it depends on what they consider to be healthy for the particular lab value that they're looking at. So let me give you 2 examples about how this doesn't really work. The first one is looking at a lab value within isolation. In other words, only looking at that one lab value. So here's 2 examples. The first one is one we're all that is common, that we're all familiar with, your blood glucose. Let's say you had a reading of 90 milligrams per deciliter. 90 is considered normal. It is within the normal range. The reference range for glucose is 65 to 99. So if you were to only look at this value, or your doctor was, he or she might say that your blood glucose is perfectly fine. But what if you started to look at your fasting insulin level also? Which you may not realize is that insulin is like the key that opens the door to the cells so that the glucose can get in. If your fasting insulin level is 25, when the normal reference range is less than 17 is considered normal, this is actually elevated. So by looking at these 2 together, what we know is that your body is still able to pump out insulin, albeit at a higher rate than is considered healthy, in order to keep your blood glucose within check. But rest assured, at some point, your pancreas is going to get tired of having to pump out insulin at a higher level, and eventually this blood glucose number is going to go higher, and you will at that point be diagnosed with prediabetes or actually diabetes, depending on how high the number goes. But the insulin would have told you long before that your body isn't responding to the insulin that's being produced. The second example here is related to potential anemia. So often when doctors look for anemia, they look specifically at the MCV, which is your mean corpuscular volume. What it means is, what is the volume of your red blood cells? If you showed a 92, that would be considered within range, and your doctor would say that you don't have anemia. However, what if you also looked at your folate level? So a low folate level will make the MCV bigger. Your red blood cells will be bigger because your body needs folate in order to divide red blood cells into smaller ones as they get bigger. But if your folate is low and your iron is also low, by the way, if your iron is low, normally your MCV would be smaller because there's not enough iron to help it get bigger. If both of them are low, then your MCV can end up looking normal, when the fact is, it's not normal at all. It's just that there's a balance between the low folate, which would have made it bigger, and low iron, which would have made it smaller. So this is another example where looking at only the MCV doesn't actually tell us what's going on in your body nutritionally. The second example I want to give is when something is outside of what would be considered an optimal range. Now, as I mentioned, these 2 standard deviations are 95% of the quote-unquote healthy population. So when something is outside of the optimal range, it means that perhaps whatever that lab value is related to isn't quite functioning optimally, but not so bad that you're actually diagnosed with the disease. The one that comes up time and again when I'm talking to clients is antibodies, specifically related to autoimmunity. So, for example, if your doctor were to look at your TSH, which is thyroid stimulating hormone, or even your T4 or T3 levels, which are the hormones that your thyroid creates, everything might look normal, but you could still have symptoms associated with having thyroid problems. It's not until your doctor actually looks at those thyroid antibodies that it might be discovered that your immune system has started to attack your thyroid. Now, thyroid antibodies are considered normal if they're below about 25. The problem with this is perhaps you're not overtly having thyroid issues, but maybe you're still having symptoms. And if those antibodies are present, they are attacking the thyroid tissue. Now, granted, it may only be a few of them. It may seem like ants on the side of a building, but eventually they're going to cause enough damage that your thyroid will stop functioning normally. All of which is to say, whenever you're looking at lab values, if you have symptoms, but your doctor is telling you that the few tests he or she runs indicates there's no problem, insist that there might be some other lab values to look at, or maybe find a practitioner who looks at the optimal values for labs and not just what's considered normal by that particular lab. Good luck, and remember, you own your health and you own the numbers that indicate whether or not there's a problem.